Stakeholder management, very closely related with communication management. We start identifying stakeholders early on in the initiation, and it's a, it's very critical because there's a study that shows 86% of your time as project manager is spent managing stakeholder issues. So you need to pay close attention to managing those people. So it's the process of identifying those people, groups, organizations that could impact or be impacted by your project, to analyze their expectations and to develop appropriate strategies for effectively engaging them in your project, so that you won't have any surprises and for the benefit of your project. via 4 processes: identify stakeholders, plan stakeholder management. So identify stakeholders early on بالinitiation. You identify stakeholders. بالplanning, you plan how you're gonna manage those stakeholders. You execute the plan in manage stakeholder engagement, and you monitor and control in monitor stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder introduction. Every project will have stakeholders who are impacted by or can impact your project, either in a positive or negative way. Some stakeholders have limited ability to influence, others have significant influence on your project. So proper project management techniques requires you identifying all these stakeholders, and any missing stakeholder here might impact your project because you did not identify and work with them and engage them. Determine their requirements, determine their expectations, their communication expectations, and their scope and schedule and cost and quality and all those requirements, to determine their level of influence, and then incorporate that information into your product and scope and communication as needed. Stakeholder management should take place throughout the project lifecycle. So what should you do with stakeholders throughout the project? First, you identify all of them as early as possible. Then you determine their requirements by sitting with them, by conducting requirements reviews, by sending surveys, by engaging with them to know what the requirements are. Then you determine their expectations, and expectations might be a hidden or undefined requirement. Determine their level of interest. Do they care about your project? Will they be engaged in your project? Determine their level of influence: negative, positive, high, medium, low. And here the matrix of influence versus interest, we will be using this matrix later on in developing the engagement plan. So you need to focus or put different strategies to people who have high interest, high influence, and different strategies for stakeholders who have low influence, low interest. Then you plan how you will manage these, how you will keep them involved, how you will manage their interest, how you will keep their influence tamed, and how to meet their expectations, and plan how you will communicate with them, because communication is 99% of the way of meeting those expectations and answering their needs. Trends, tailoring considerations for Agile. Identify stakeholder is the process of identifying the process groups or organizations, listing them early on in the project or phase. Some phases might have different stakeholders, so you need to probably revisit this process again and again every time. When they are discovered later, they will probably request change, and this is costly. Stakeholders should be classified, listed and classified and grouped with their interest and influence levels. This will enable you to focus on relationships also necessary to ensure the success of the project. Who is the ally of who? Who can help in deciding and who can decide in influencing other stakeholders? Who's the decision maker, who's not? Who's affiliated, who has a partnership, etc. And you need the charter because it has the initial stakeholders listed, business documents, project management plan, specifically the communication management plan and stakeholder engagement plan, and documents like the change log, issue log, and the requirements documentation. Agreements also have stakeholders to identify whether those are representative of the suppliers or the team members of the suppliers. EEFs and OPAs. OPAs like your stakeholder register that you have to use or follow as template. Stakeholders identified from previous projects so that you won't forget any stakeholder type, and lessons learned from previous projects. Tools and techniques, data analysis here in the form of stakeholder analysis. This is where you systematically gather and analyze the information to determine whose interest on this project should be taken into account throughout the project. So, بلدية زحلة, let's analyze who would be our stakeholders for the بلدية. Will they be NGOs? Will there be the residents? Will there be expats? هل حيكون I don't know, probably اللاجئين السورية لأنه عم يشتغل مع NGO والسكوب تبعها اللاجئين السورية. So it's analyzing this information to come up with the stakeholders, their interests, their expectations, their level of influence, and the relationships among each other, so that we can, leverage on this and build the coalitions needed and the partnerships needed to enhance the chance of success on the project. كمان data analysis technique هي document analysis, where I identify stakeholders from information I collect from documents. Steps to identify stakeholders: you identify all potential stakeholders and you document the relevant information such as their role, their departments, their interests, their level of knowledge, their expectations, their level of influence. Now, key stakeholders are usually easy to identify, like your sponsor, your client, your your key team members, etc. And this is where you analyze the potential impact or support each customer could generate on your project, and you classify them so as to later define a strategy to engage them. You assess how key stakeholders are likely to react in different situations on your project. So, إذا مثلا بدي أغير السكوب أو بدي I want to reduce quality requirements, or there's a big change, how this group of stakeholders will react. وهون data representation in the form of, if you want, mainly the اللي حكينا عليها, the level of power and influence, or influence and impact, or power versus interest grid, and you start depicting those identified stakeholders. So stakeholders with high interest and high power بيكونوا الupper right quadrant. These, as a strategy, you decided to manage closely. شو يعني manage closely? Probably meet with them every week. Probably keep them engaged by sending them progress update. Properly give them a call. Probably have a coffee with them every Friday. People with low interest, but they have high power and can influence your project, you need to keep them satisfied as a strategy. شو tactics to keep them satisfied؟ رح نشوفها how to think about it in the plan. These people with low interest, low power, monitor them, بلكي يتغيروا يصير عندهم high power or high interest. واللي عندهم high interest بس low power, keep them informed لعل وعسى.
جابي في اسال سؤال. كنت عم بتقول انه انا كبروجكت مانجر I have to manage these stakeholders، بس مبدئيا تربيعهم بيكون الاونر او الكلاينت او الامبلوير هو منقيهم، مثل سورت بارتي، مثل بروجكت مانجر اتسترا. يعني انا كبروجكت مانجر على المشروع يلي انا جاي من قبل الاونر،
اوكي،
ما الحق يمكن كثير اعمل مانجمنت للستيك هولدرز.
بالعكس انت عندك the main responsibility انه تهتم بهالستيك هولدرز لو هن كانوا مفروضين عليك او pre-selected as vendors or clients. لانه if you don't keep them engaged and highly interested, رح تفشل حالك ويفشل مشروعك وتفشل قدام مديرك. ما إلك حق. هلا ما حنشوف شو يعني to keep them engaged and how to communicate with them. بس عندك كل الحق. ما انت على الفرونت لاين. اعطيك اكزامبل صغير. اذا انت بورشه اذا انت بورشه والناطور تبع الورشه منه ستيك هولدر. ستيك هولدر ولا لا؟
بلا اكيد. ايه ما في هو اذا بدك ليفل للستيك هولدرز.
ايه هالناطور قد ايه عنده باور؟ probably lower low power. بس قديش عنده انترست بالمشروع؟ high interest. كيف رح تتعامل معه؟ اوكي. الكونسلتنت من قبل الكلاينت از ستيك هولدر. هاي باور هاي انفلونس هاي انترست. كيف رح تتعامل معه؟ رح تخليه ان ذا دارك ولا رح تخليه ابديتد بكل مسمار عم بتدقه بالورشه؟ فهمت شو قصدي؟
اكيد ابديتد.
مثلا يمكن الانجيجمنت بلان تبعك تاخده تبرمه على غير ورش. يمكن الانجيجمنت بلان تبعك كمان فيو ستيب تاخده تعشيه مره بالشهر. عرفت شو قصدي؟ So you're gonna put it in practice. الengagement مع stakeholder you should put it in practice as a plan, as an action plan.
Okay. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you.
Okay. So expert judgment as a technique, senior management, other units within the organization that can help you to identify stakeholders by sitting with them. You identify stakeholders by doing meetings where you analyze the profile, مثلا disk profile تبع stakeholders during those meetings, or it can be used this meeting to exchange and analyze the information about their roles, their interests, their knowledge, and their overall position facing the project. بده يطلع stakeholder register. It's a list that contains all the details related to the stakeholders that you have identified. It could have information like their name, their position, location, role on the project, contact information. بده يطلع their major requirements, their main expectations, their level of influence, which phases of the project they will be most interested in, and you classify them. They are internal, they are external, they are neutral, supporter, resistor. Yani you can use your imagination to keep a register for stakeholders. Now, this document is بتكون used and should be consulted and updated on a regular basis throughout the project lifecycle. Some stakeholders may change, new ones could be identified, their level of influence and impact might change, so you need to keep a close eye on the stakeholder register. Could be as simple as this: the name, the title, department, contact info, communication needs, frequency, level of details, and their impact, major requirements, major expectations, their level of influence from 1 to 5, 5 being high influence, and their role on the project. بيطلع change requests. Any change to identify new stakeholders or new information about stakeholders that necessitate a change request to the project management plan and subsidiary plans. بيطلع updates على ال requirements management plan, communication management plan, because they are closely related. So the communication management plan is how to communicate. The stakeholder management plan is why to communicate with stakeholders. And the risk management plan could be updated, and the engagement plan could be updated. بيطلع updates على ال assumption log, issue log, and the risk register. Not every stakeholders will be as engaged in the project as you might like them to be, and some might be more engaged than you would want them to be. Okay, so في ناس عم تتدخل بقصص وما مفروض، وفي ناس عندها high influence. They can remove barriers for you or blockages. They can if يكونوا يأمنوا لكم specific resources بس منهم as engaged، ما عم بيساعدوكم مثل ما لازم. So how to manage that? You start planning on how you are going to engage those stakeholders in the stakeholder management plan. رح يطلع a key output اسمه stakeholder engagement plan. It's the how you're gonna engage them. So it's the process of developing appropriate strategies and tactics to engage those stakeholders. This process provides a clear, actionable plan, مش high level. يعني كم عشاء بدي اخده؟ قد ايه بده يكلفني كل عشاء؟ لوين بدي اعمل له تور تيشوف السيستم تبعي implemented in other banks؟ كم meeting بدنا نعمل معهم etc. to interact with those stakeholders. And this process generates what we call the stakeholder management plan. It's an iterative process that should be reviewed on a regular basis by the project management team. At the beginning of the project, it may be necessary for senior stakeholders to be highly engaged. Why? To clear away any obstacles. Once these obstacles are removed ونحط البروجكت على السكة مظبوط, it may be sufficient for those senior stakeholders, يعني CEOs, CFOs, business owners, NGO representatives, etc., to change their level of engagement from leading to supporting. And other stakeholders such as end users, business process owners, these become more important. To plan for stakeholder management, you need the charter. It has the initial list of stakeholders and what we are trying to achieve on the project. The project management plan, specifically resource communication and risk management plans. Project documents, agreements, all EAFs and all OPAs. Tools and techniques, nothing new. Meetings, data gathering, data representation, decision making. Data representation in the form of mind mapping, stakeholder assessment matrix. Are these stakeholders should be unaware? Are they resistant to change? Are they neutral facing change, or will they be supportive, leading the change? So the current engagement or the as-is situation now will be documented using what we call stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. And the gap between where they are now and where you want them to be, probably you want them to be leading instead of resisting, hal gap should be identified, and later on actions should be put and communications should be put in place to close this gap between them being resistant to them being leading this change. So for every stakeholder, we list the stakeholder ومنحط the situation تبعه. Are they unaware, resistant, neutral, supportive, or leading? ومنقول stakeholder 1 is unaware of the project. We want her to be supportive. And this is the gap. How to take her from being unaware to being supportive. Okay. رح نحط strategy. Mainly it's over communication. Tactics رح يكونوا نعزمها على team management meetings. بنبعث لها prompt status report. بنخبرها always إذا في شيء that we are anticipating so that there will be no surprises. So the strategies and the tactics to take your stakeholders from the current state to the desired state. رح نمشي بغير هيدا. So رح يطلع stakeholder engagement plan وفيه the information to be distributed, their engagement level, the interrelationships and overlaps between them, the frequency for distribution, the methods for updating them. This is an example where you have a stakeholder, and this is our assessment. So عندنا مثلا IT manager second row. الimpact تبعه is high because نحن we are implementing a system, a new system company wide. وحيصير في عنده changes to the IT department job descriptions, and usually these people had tough times to scale new systems in the past. So his reaction to change, we anticipate to be a blocker to the change. He wants to develop his in-house baby of a system. So رح يكون resistant to change. His influence is medium because, of course, he controls the use of the systems. He have the access control lists, and they have access to everything. And it has a track record that is being poor supporting systems. شو strategy والtactic تبعنا؟ We're going to stress the opportunity for him to increase his influence through a major system implementation. ورح ناخده على study tour to see the system being implemented and successful elsewhere in similar industries. ورح نفرجيه انه he will improve his impact. He will not lose any jobs. بالعكس, he needs more jobs to support the new ERP system. Who's responsible for it? NP will be executing those strategies and tactics. Okay? This is a sample stakeholder engagement plan. It's practical. I'm classifying the stakeholder where they are, where I want them to be, and I'm putting the strategies and the tactics to take them there. So, رح يطلع كمان stakeholder engagement plan, the communication management plan that emphasizes the details about the technology, the methods of communication, or the how to communicate. The stakeholder management plan, on the other hand, explain why you are communicating, why stakeholders need to receive this information, how the sharing of that information will help them in being engaged and meeting their expectations. Portions of these two plans are often created together, and they were part of the same chapter in previous versions of the PM book. The stakeholder management plan is a sensitive document. فيه شغلات ما لازم يشوفها كل العالم. So probably we've classified them as resistant, and this can potentially damage their reputation, and due consideration should be given regarding distributing this document. Manage stakeholder engagement. It's the process of communicating and working with the stakeholders to meet their needs and expectations, address issues. So initially we planned, now we are executing the plan. We are taking them on study tours, we are showing them the benefit, we are meeting with them, etc. And it is critical to consult the communication management plan also, because how can you keep people involved and informed if you are not communicating with them? Some of the activities to engage stakeholders could be to engage them at appropriate stages of the project, to obtain and confirm their continued, يعني you are gauging them قديش بعدهم committed, عم ناخذ لهم حرارتهم. Managing their expectations through negotiation, communication, and making sure they know that goals are being achieved. Addressing their potential concerns قبل ما يصيروا issues. And these concerns need to be identified and discussed as soon as possible so that they won't turn into risks and then issues. And to clarify and resolve any issue that have been identified. Active management of stakeholder involvement decreases the risk of project failing. I need communication plan, stakeholder engagement plan, risk management plan, because the risk, رح نشوفها later on, some of their mitigating strategies to respond to risk are mainly communication and over communication and proactive communication with the stakeholders. And this is what we're trying to do here, to keep them engaged. Project documents, tools and techniques, mainly communication skills, interpersonal and team skills. Interpersonal and team skills, building trust skills, resolving conflicts, active listening, and overcoming resistance to change. So change management. Management skills, facilitating consensus, influencing people, negotiating, and modifying the behavior of the organization to accept the project outcomes. So probably you should train before you change so they would accept the change. The communication methods, you decide how, when, and which of these communication methods to be used as per the communication management plan. رح يطلع change requests, رح يطلع updates على ال project management plan, specifically the stakeholder management plan. For example, some communications may no longer be necessary, an ineffective communication method may be replaced, or a new communication requirement may be identified. So you go and you update the communication plan, for example. Project documents will be updated. and you monitor stakeholder engagement. This is the process of monitoring the overall project stakeholder relationships and adjusting the strategies and making sure the engagement plan is being followed. So monitoring stakeholder engagements will help you understand the perceptions of the stakeholders to the project progress. Are they okay? Which will in turn allow to make minor adjustments to ensure the continuing engagement and support of these stakeholders. This process also involves reassessing the stakeholder register, adding new stakeholders as appropriate, and noting when a particular stakeholder involvement is no longer necessary in that specific phase. You need project management plan, work performance data, project documents, same tools and techniques for managed stakeholder engagement. بيطلع work performance information. This is the monitoring and controlling. So رح يطلع work performance information، رح يطلع change requests، ورح يطلع updates على البلانز وupdates على البروجكت documents. Questions?